All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Giselle Rodriguez Greenwood. I am the chapter president of NAHJ Houston. Um, Happy Women's History Month. I'm very glad you could join us here today, and we're excited to kick off the first of what we hope will be several series of informational panels with a Latina journalist. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle is at NAHJ Houston. So our speaker today is Lulu Garcia-Navarro. Lulu is the host of NPR's Weekend Edition Sunday and is one of the hosts of NPR's morning news podcast, Up First. Before joining the Sunday morning team, she served as an NPR correspondent based in Brazil, Israel, Mexico, and Iraq. She was one of the first reporters to enter Libya under the 2011 Arab Spring uprising and spent months painting a deep and vivid portrait of a country at war. Often at great personal risk, Lulu captured history in the making with stunning insight, courage, and humanity. For her work covering the Arab Spring, she received several awards, including a Peabody Award and an Edward R. Murrow Award from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. Moderating today's panel will be our very own board member, Ruthie Munoz, who will kick us off in our interview with Lulu. Ruthie, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Lulu, for your willingness to have a little conversation with us as we celebrate the wonderful women in media, of which, of course, you are one.
Yes.
Your trailblazing career. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how did those experiences influence your career?
So I grew up kind of in a weird way, in the sense that my family is partially Cuban, and so my mother left Cuba in 1959, and we were 6 children, and we were all born in different countries. We had the experience of exile, and so that, I think, informed my view of the world because we moved around a lot, I mean, my mother got married at 15. My father was 17 when they were married. They had their 3rd child on the way when they left Cuba. And so, they found themselves in the United States, and as has been the experience of so many in our community, a sort of stranger in a strange land, and had to make their way in the world. And my mother's partially Panamanian, and so she lives between the United States and Panama. And they ended up going there where my other sister was born, and so they ended up moving around a lot. And so I think that made me incredibly eager to sort of understand the world, to go out and explore, to see what stories I could bring back to the United States. I always had this sort of view that it was really important to find out what was going on in other places and take those stories back home. And so I ended up in my career really focusing on 2 regions of the world, which are the Middle East, where I spent a long time, and then Latin America, where I spent a long time. And what's great, and I was very fortunate to do, is that I was able to live in those places that I covered. I wasn't just sort of flying in and doing a story and leaving. I was actually living in the communities that I covered, in Iraq for almost 10 years, and in Latin America. I started, my first staff job was in Colombia, and then my first job for NPR was in Mexico City. And then, I spent 4 years in Brazil before coming back to the United States and becoming a host. So I spent a lot of time, living in the communities that I was covering. And I think that was really important.
That's really impressive. And I read somewhere that you were born in England. Is that correct?
I was born in London. My dad ended up, for work purposes, like I said, he ended up in the United States and then went to Panama for a job, and then, ended up in London for a job, and he died when I was young, when I was 5. So then we ended up moving back to Miami. And so it was this sort of itinerant upbringing, because, in some ways my parents had been unmoored from their country. And so they ended up, going to a lot of different places to make it work. So I was there until I was about 5 years old. And then once my dad died, we moved back to Miami. And I lived there for most of my childhood. So it was, I consider Florida my home state, which it is. I now, as I was telling you before we came on, I have a flamingo in my front yard because I have to represent.
Yeah, and I see on your Twitter thing you say you're a Florida woman.
Yeah, I always think that's funny. I'm obsessed with like a Florida man, a Florida woman, how it always starts, and then there's some terrible thing that comes after it. And I take that mantle proudly. I am a Florida woman in many ways. So I do love my home state for all of its quirks, of which there are many.
So you grew up bilingual. How do you think that helped shape your career?
I was really fortunate. I mean, I was really lucky in that I understood Spanish. I didn't speak it really well. And then my grandmother, my abuela, who had been a Spanish teacher in Cuba, would take me in, and I would go to her house like 3 times a week. And she would drill it into me, she would absolutely drill it into me. I was, I understood Spanish in our house. We spoke Spanish. I mean, I grew up in a completely bilingual house, but at the same time, me da pena. I was always a little bit shy and a little bit embarrassed to actually speak it. But, Miami, as you may know, for anyone who's been to Miami, it's like you speak Spanish first, and then if they don't speak Spanish, maybe you'll go into English. So I also grew up in a community in Miami where I actually didn't know that Latinos weren't didn't, populate the entirety of America. Like I thought, because in Miami, you ran into everyone and everyone spoke Spanish, and everyone you knew was, from Latin America in some way, that I grew up in a way where speaking Spanish was really normal, where it was, just completely part of your daily experience. And not only within your family, but just when you were at the store, when you were at the supermarket, everyone was speaking to you in Spanish. And so I think it was a really rich way of growing up in that way, because, it never felt otherized to me. It never was something that felt, okay, this is strange. This is a weird thing. This was like a thing that felt part of my daily experience that I was doing. And really, I think it was once I left Miami, I was like, wait a second, are you telling me that not everyone speaks Spanish here in the United States? Are you telling me some people think it's weird and bad? I mean, I really did. I found it kind of astonishing. And that's one of the great things about Miami. When you live in that kind of environment, you can feel like your culture is precious.
It is, especially having that little cafecito.
That little cafecito, like, pastelitos, todo, you miss it all.
Todo. So how old were you when you got that culture shock that not everyone spoke Spanish?
It's funny. I remember distinctly when I was about 13 or 14, I went into a store, and it was kind of like a bit of a fancy store in Miami. It wasn't something that I would normally have gravitated to. It wasn't the mall, you know what I mean? It was kind of like a boutique-y thing. And I remember hearing a couple of women, older women, talking about the Cubans, and they were Americans of, not of Hispanic descent. And they were talking about the Cubans, about how the Cubans had come to Miami. And I remember that was like the first time I really was had processed, oh, we're not seen like we're from here. We're seen like we're from somewhere else, that we've come to this place, their place. And I think that was the first time that I really kind of processed that feeling of not everyone sees us the same way. And I know that that's pretty late, because I know that so many other people have had that experience much sooner. But because Miami is Miami, as we mentioned, I think I was protected in that way. from that experience that so many of us Latinos have had in other parts of the country. And then it was, a series of like, once you get exposed to the rest of the world, you realize that, yeah, it ain't that everywhere. And certainly people don't see you in that way. And I wasn't a citizen. I became a citizen in 2017. And so I always had this sense of going through customs and border enforcement whenever I left the country and came back, which we did a lot because, like I said, my mother was Panamanian. We'd go and see family in Panama all the time. And there was always this terror. And I know that this is something I've tried to explain this to people who aren't immigrants to this country. My mother going through Customs and Border Patrol should be like, dame los pasaporte. It was like this hysterical thing of like, give me the passports, no digas ni una palabra, don't say a word, like you were going through this very, kind of scary thing. And if you say a bad word, if you say something wrong, something really bad could happen to you. So I always understood that I was, that there was something different to that interaction from when I was very, very young. But it wasn't until I was older that I was like, okay, now I understand what that is. And that fear stayed with me, that fear of going through passport control and crossing borders, which is weird considering what I ended up doing, which was like being an international correspondent. But I still, that ingrained fear of when I go to any border and crossing it, it always felt like this moment of great fear and great tension where someone could come and sort of destroy your life. And that was my parents' own legacy of their experience, right? My mother's experience of having to leave her country, of having loss, of losing the things that she loved and knew. And so, that is like this thing that gets passed on.
Absolutely. And I could definitely relate to what you're saying.
Mm.
Hopefully now that you're an American citizen,
Yes.
you don't carry that fear with you anymore.
Yeah, but it took a while. There was part of me that didn't become a citizen for a while because I don't know, I felt maybe like I didn't belong. And then when I finally did it, it was an incredibly moving experience. It was a profoundly moving experience. And then it did all of a sudden make me feel like they can't take that away from me. My mother always used to say, when she left Cuba, she's like, they can take everything from you, but they can't take your education. That was when I didn't want to go to school anymore or whatever. She'd be like, they can never take away your education. But once I became a citizen, I felt like, okay, like this is not something that they could take from me. I have a right to be here, So it's just a legacy of the way that we grow up. What was your experience?
So I was born here. Thank you for asking, but my parents weren't, they immigrated here. And so, I haven't had that experience, I guess, until I was a flight attendant for many years before becoming a journalist. And I remember I became a flight attendant after September 11th. And
oh, wow.
And whenever we would have days off, that there was a crew of us, it's like 2 or 3 of us that we would fly around the world and just, have fun. And I have like this big personality and I'm always joking and whatever. And I found out the hard way, you don't do that through customs.
Oh, no.
Through customs, even as an American citizen. So yeah.
Yeah, no, you definitely learned that the hard way,
So yes.
Yeah.
So I can relate in a way, but yeah.
No, for sure. I mean, it is, I think, like I said, it's a legacy of like also where your parents came from and their experiences. They pass that on, they definitely, you can feel that. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to your career.
Hmm.
So I understand that you started journalism as a freelancer.
I did.
The BBC World Service.
I did.
And Voice of America.
Yes.
So can you tell us what that experience was like and how you first connected with them?
So I ended up, after I left university, I did Latin American studies, and I I spent so much of my college years. Um, I would lie to my mother, and then I would go. I would get a cheap flight, and I would go to like Guatemala or El Salvador or Nicaragua, to try and see the places that I was studying. And I'd stay in hostels, and I got the bug of traveling and trying to see. Like, I was learning about things in university, and then I wanted to see them for myself, and I wanted to kind of get a grasp on them. And so I realized I left school, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had always loved journalism. I just realized I didn't know how to be a journalist. Like, I didn't know how that would work. But I did know that I wanted to be an international journalist. And I realized that that was the thing that really kind of made me feel passionate. And I had no idea what that ended up looking like. And so in doing some research, and also because I was born in England, hot tip, in the United Kingdom, master's programs are 1 year, so not 2. So you get a master, and also undergrad is 3 years. So you can get a master's in undergrad in 4 years in the United Kingdom, and it's a lot cheaper, just as a thing. And so I basically did that. I went to, they have a very different system there, especially for journalists, in which it's vocational, right? It's not, you don't get all the bells and whistles of, theory and ethics. And I mean, you do get ethics, but all this stuff that you get perhaps in a liberal arts master's degree in the United States. There it really is like they have specialist schools which train you for different things, and they have a particular one for journalists where all the journalists go, and they have an international program. So it brought journalists from all over the world, from the Caribbean, from Eastern Europe. I mean, it really is like this melting pot of like their international program, which was astonishing and wonderful. And the reason I ended up in radio is that, also, unlike the United States, they're not very well funded. So they didn't have a television program. I wanted to go and broadcast. In my head, it was television. All they had was radio. That was their broadcast program. They were like, you're going to learn radio. And I was like, okay. And so I found out that I really loved it. And I did it in a year. And then as part of it, they do internships. And I got an internship at the Associated Press. And I worked for a wonderful woman there called Karen Sloan. And she ended up hiring me as a freelancer, meaning to say I got regular gigs, right? So I had, I got to go in, I got paid by the day. And then I ended up branching out and working for the World Service, BBC World Service, and working for VOA, all as a freelancer, just sort of cobbled together, a career by working different shifts on different places over different days. And what it gave me was a real range, in the sense that I got to see a lot of different types of journalism, and I got to do a bunch of different things. But my first staff job, is one of those sort of gigs, was at the Associated Press Television News, APTN. And they sent me as a producer to Colombia, to Bogota. And that was my first sort of staff job. And so I was just really lucky that I was able to, use my skills and then just kind of do what I really had wanted to do.
So no regrets that you didn't go in the direction of TV?
No. I had opportunities later, and I've always stayed in radio. I respect and love my TV colleagues. I think it's an amazing thing what they do. But already gave me anxiety having to put on some makeup for this. You know what I mean? It was like, I like to be able, in fact, I just had an interview with someone, and they're like, can you turn on your camera? And I was like, if I wanted to be on TV, I would have been in television. So I'm not going to turn on my camera right now. Thank you very much. Because of course I'm like sitting here. I mean, I cleaned up the bed, but I'm in my guest bedroom. Normally there's laundry back there. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not super ready for the on-camera moment. And I like radio. I really do love it. I love it as a medium. I just love it. And so, yeah, no regrets. My mother has tons of regrets. Pero por qué, mija? Pero, eres tan bonita. You could be on television. She always sees it like I'm a stepdad. I'm always like, Mom, lots of people listen. It's not less than. It's equal and different. But
Yes, we are blessed to hear your voice over the airwaves. And next time that we do this, if there is a next time, just come as you are. No makeup.
Come as I am.
Beautiful as you are.
Your mom said, I'm seeing someone saying, yeah, mom said the same thing when I chose print journalism. I mean, I think especially like Latinos in particular, we watch so much TV, right? TV is such a big cultural gathering point, the visual arts that like, it's not real unless you're on television. So, I started doing some pundit things for a while on CNN and other places. And I don't enjoy it. But my mother was like, oh my God, you'd think that that was the moment that I had hit it big for her. She was like, I saw you on CNN. Estaba muy bonita, Anyway.
Hi, mommy. We love our mommies.
We do. We do.
So I wanted to ask you, in terms of freelancing, how hard was it, and what advice would you give freelancers? I do both freelancing and I'm on staff as a contributor somewhere, so I know it's a little bit rough.
Yeah, I mean, so freelancing has changed a lot. That's the first thing I'll say. From when I started to when it is now, I mean, freelancing is very different. I'm going to tell you, I think in many news organizations, it's an exploitative arrangement. I do think that, I got to tell you, in the sense that they don't pay very well. They don't pay on time. And they ask a lot, and don't give you a lot of support. And so, I think that freelancing is a good way in if you have the means to be able to support that. But as we know, in many of our, especially among people of color, it's like we don't have that financial background to be able to support and sustain unpaid internships, freelancing and sort of doing gigs. And I think that one of the great reckonings that has happened recently, as we've had this great conversation about race and equality in this country over the past year, is an understanding within journalism that if you're going to have and you want to attract not only communities of color to be journalists, but also to listen to your journalism, how do you do that in an equitable fashion? And there has been, it's an ongoing thing, but a sort of a rethinking of that relationship. And so I think freelancing is really tough. I think that if you want to go abroad and you want to cover something internationally, it is a way to do it. There is a way to do it. Most of the young people that I have worked with overseas and ended up becoming, my seconds or, my alternate correspondents did that. They ended up picking a country, going there and sort of making it work, living cheaply, getting relationships and sort of building their career that way. And that is a way to do it. It's just, it's just a hard way. It's a hard way, there's no question.
So would you still, in the climate that we live in today, would you still recommend freelancing to someone?
I always ask people their personal situation. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what is it, first of all, that it also depends on the kind of person you are. Are you a very self-motivated person? Are you a person that requires a lot of infrastructure to be productive? A lot of oversight? What is it that you want from the journalism? I mean, do you want to have, at least initially, an editorial relationship where you can understand, learn about good writing? Because a lot of times freelancers don't get that. They don't get that support, or is it that you want the freedom to understand and really dig into a culture? And I'm talking about international journalism, but this, by the way, is the same thing as if you're going to be doing it in your home country. What is it? What is the kind of relationship that you're looking at? The other thing is, while I was doing it, I had jobs that I didn't love necessarily. Like, I didn't ever want to be a producer. I always wanted to be a reporter. My first job was as a producer for television. But I was doing stuff on the side, right? I was reporting on the side. I was doing other things that would sort of build that body of work that could be presented to someone. And so when I finally got the opportunity for NPR, I had been doing a lot of stuff that wasn't really applicable to the long form or the longer form journalism that NPR did. But because I've been doing stuff for the BBC World Service, that was the stuff that I submitted, and that was more resonant to them. And so that was the thing that ultimately allowed me to get the job, So I think one of the things that you can do as a freelancer is really build up a body of work. But I also think you have to, really think about what your personal circumstances are, and also, where you think you'll thrive, more easily.
And so it's interesting because that was my next question. What was your job like as a producer for AP television before you transitioned to AP radio?
So I worked first in London on the desk there. And that was like, I would deal with all the different camera people and producers in Latin America, and I would take in their work, and then edit it there, and then, broadcast it. And so that was my job, was like a desk job in London, which was great and really fun. And then when I got sent to Colombia, my job there was very different in the sense that, it was, you were there, you got to cover things, you got to go out and do things. But I will also say that I had not had a professional experience at that point in Latin America, which is very different than I had, I had my professional experiences be there. I had worked in college in the United States, and then I had worked in London, sort of doing journalism. And then all of a sudden I found myself in Latin America, where it's just very, very different. And there was a really steep learning curve in terms of how to deal with and how to have a relationship with my coworkers. I came into a bureau where there were, 2 male photojournalists, 2 cameramen. They had grown up and learned about journalism covering the wars in Central America. They were Central American. They had a very different, sort of background. I came in from London as basically a gringa adjacent, as far as they were concerned. And so there was a lot of stuff that you just had to navigate, issues of just everything, from, sexism to, their, class issues to color issues to all sorts of things that I think was just a profoundly important experience to have at the beginning of my career. Because I often think that, it was really hard and really painful. And I learned a lot, and it was brutal. But I also think that it really gave me a sensitivity and an understanding of, the wide variety of experiences that people come into when they come into this profession. And I think in the United States, and certainly in Europe, it's been professionalized to a large degree, and it is as well in Latin America. But it is really important to understand the range of experiences that people have, and to sort of, instead of seeing yourself, try and see how other people see you when you're coming into their space, right? How are people seeing you, and how do you accommodate that? It's a lot there.
No, it's a lot. It's a lot to unpack. So I would just follow up with 2 questions. One, was there ever a point when you were dealing with all of this that you wanted to quit?
Yeah. Oh God, I did. By the way, every day still, do you know what I mean? So let's just start with that as a thing, not because I don't love NPR, but don't we all, have any moment in a day just feel terrible, hate our jobs, think, oh my God, I'm never going to get to what I want. I don't know that feeling, I hate to tell you, no matter where you end up on the totem pole, really goes away. But that first job was really horrible. I'm not going to start telling stories, but like really, really horrible. And super, super hard. And so I ended up not quitting, but deciding that I was going to leave and finding an opportunity to do that. And so weirdly, that opportunity came with 9/11. So when 9/11 happened, I had covered the Middle East before. And so AP Radio, which I had been freelancing for in London, who hired me in my first job, they called me up and said, listen, do you want to go to Afghanistan? There's going to be a war. And I said, yes. And so I had been covering the conflict in Colombia, which was brutal at that point, the civil war. But at that point I went to Afghanistan. And so that's how I got out of that particular situation. And some would say got myself into a worse one, but I did not enjoy the professional experience that I was having there. It's hard.
So because I want to talk a little bit more about your war correspondence, but what would be your advice for someone that's thinking to transition from one medium in journalism to the other?
I mean, if you're looking to change, so it's, first of all, I think it's easier now than it has been, simply because what is journalism now, right? Like, it's changing so much. The avenues of disseminating information, the way that we get information is changing so much that I think all these things are sort of fusing in a way. And so, in audio now, there's just an explosion in the audio world of podcasters. And everybody has a podcast. I think someone told me there's 6 million podcasts now. Everybody's got a podcast. Every forget news organization, every company in this country has a podcast. Trader Joe's has a podcast. So there's a big range of things that you can move into. I think I would say don't limit yourself. Don't think that, because that's a different medium, that is not something that I'm good at. Journalism skills are transferable. The basis is there. What we do, we hire people from print, we hire people from television, we've hired photojournalists. The basic stuff is there. It's all just in the different method of writing and dissemination, and also what you prefer, what you like to do. Like I said, I don't like television. I'm not, I think print is wonderful, but I like radio where that lives. It sort of lives between, television and, it has the immediacy of broadcast, but it allows you to sort of write more and interject more of yourself than you do in print. So, it's a question of what you want, but there are a lot of opportunities. Now, I don't think you should limit yourself.
Absolutely. I have to agree with you on that one. So what were your experiences like? You were stationed for NPR in Israel.
I started, Mexico. Then I went to Iraq. I had been there from before. I had been in Iraq for several years before that for the AP, and in Israel before that as well for the AP. So sort of retracing my steps after I went to Mexico, I went back to the Middle East. So yeah, I spent a long time over there. My experiences in what way?
So I guess
as a woman, as a
woman,
Latina,
as a war correspondent.
So becoming a conflict correspondent is a hard thing to get into, because it's a hard thing. And a lot of people don't get up in the morning and say, hey, I want to go cover war, necessarily, because it's something that is, it's really difficult to sort of find yourself in that milieu. It attracted me because it was one of the first things that I did as a professional journalist. I got sent to Kosovo. I got that job at AP Radio, and literally they said to me, do you want to go to cover the Kosovo conflict? And I was like, yeah, I do. And once I had that experience where I saw the best and the worst, where I saw just the extremes, it felt so essential to bear witness that I found it really important. And then coming back to Latin America, covering the drug war in Mexico, in Colombia, conflict is everywhere. Conflict is here in the United States. What is, I would say nowadays, what is, we have this traditional idea of armies battling, on front lines. And that is certainly part of what I covered. But I would say the conflict now is much more diffuse. harder to track down. And so in many ways, if you're a journalist and you're covering current events, you are a conflict correspondent. I mean, I was in DC when they, charged the Capitol, something I never expected to see in this country. I mean, that is something that I saw in countries that I covered that were called countries at war. So I think, for me, the idea of what a conflict is and what a war is has changed. But I mean, I've had an enormous amount, of experiences there that are, it's hard to be a woman in that world. I remember when I went to Iraq for NPR for the first time, they said that I'd been the first woman of color, person of color it was woman of color, certainly, but person of color, full stop, to have covered it for them. I mean, it wasn't a space necessarily in which you found a lot of people that had different backgrounds,
What would you say is one of the most challenging things as a journalist in foreign nations?
I mean, I think the most challenging thing that you do, and this is, again, it's like when you go into any community that's not your own, because I always say this about being an international correspondent, a foreign correspondent, which is I can live in Rio de Janeiro. I can know Rio de Janeiro really well, but if I have to go to a specific favela, I'm not going to know that favela. I'm not going to know necessarily the what's happening there in intimate detail. I'm almost going to be going in there like I am going in there as an outsider. And so it's a skill that I think has really been useful to me, because I cover communities in the United States that I don't know very well, that are quote unquote foreign to me. And that skill is a really important one as a journalist at large, which is to come in with humility, to come in thinking about what you are trying to learn, and be open to having your mind blown. And what I mean by that is we all go in knowing the story that we want, right? If not, we wouldn't be there, or knowing the story that we think we should get. But the best kinds of stories are the ones where you go there and you're like, whoa, this isn't like it was supposed to be at all. This isn't what I thought at all. Because if it surprises you, it's going to surprise your audience. And so you have to keep an open mind. And so what it taught me really is, like, wherever I go, I just want to be there with, like, I'm in your world now. Tell me about your world, And that's what I learned, being an international correspondent, working in all sorts of different types of communities. These were places that I lived. I mean, I lived in Iraq for almost 10 years. And yet, I was of course always an outsider. And you always need to have someone there that's going to bring you into the place that they know. So I would always work with people, even when I spoke the language, even as, Hispanic, working in Mexico, working in Colombia. If I was going to a specific community, I would always have someone from that community bring me in, because they're the ones that know, right? It's almost like a cultural translation.
So we're about to go into Q&A with the audience, but I just wanted to ask you one last question. Is there one story that you have covered that is your favorite or has stayed with you?
I have so many stories that are so powerful, and I get asked this a lot, and I never have a very good answer. But the story that was, to me, the one that I'll never forget is when I went back and covered the death of Fidel Castro, la muerte de Fidel Castro. Because that was something that, to me, considering the history of my family, was a moment that I thought I would never get to cover as a journalist. To be able to be in Cuba talking to Cubans, to get that perspective, which I feel is such an important perspective, it really felt like it was a gift. It felt like, I was the right person at the right time to cover that event. And, it allowed me to understand my own history better, but also to understand the history of an island that I've been covering for quite some time as a journalist in a really intimate and in a really intimate and powerful way. So that, to me, was, like, I think, a really special story that I got to, I mean, special, I mean, just like impactful story that I got to cover.
And I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so much for your time. Don't leave. We have some Q&As from the audience. Giselle will be handling the questions.
Thank you. So thank you, Lulu. Your insight has been incredibly helpful. And by the way, I'm also Cuban. I'm Cuban and Colombian, actually. So a
So there you
lot of
go.
what you said resonated.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I've been to Cuba.
Yeah, no, I covered Cuba loads. I mean, you know, yeah.
Yeah. So first question we have, does the fear of crossing borders apply to all borders? This
Yes.
particular person says they feel like the US is scarier than other countries. What are your thoughts?
I think the U.S. is scarier than other countries, in the sense that, and I say this way. Well, first of all, you know, the stakes are really high here, right? So if you're coming and you're a green card holder, I mean, I was told this from when I was very young, which is like, if you come, they have the right to take away your green card, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? Like they have, I mean, but it's like that they have a lot of autonomy, you know, to do, you know, whatever they want. And so if you're living in a country and you're not, you don't, you know, have that permanent sort of like bond to it with citizenship, there is this kind of fear. But I have to say, borders everywhere are scary places. They are places where a lot of things happen. There's either two opposing sides in a border, right? So crossing a border can be incredibly dangerous for that reason. There's hostilities. There are places where there's always, no matter what country, illicit activities. You know, there's smuggling. There's all sorts of things happen in borders. So I find borders to be, generally speaking, places that are super interesting. They're great places to cover, but they're always places that are enormously fraught and quite frightening. And so, yes, the United States is, you know, it can be scary and is scary, and they're not places where I felt the warm and fuzzies, even with the passport. But yeah, other places also have scary borders for other reasons.
So what has been your most scary time in crossing a border, and how did you navigate that?
My scariest time crossing a border, Libya. I
Mm.
mean, we crossed Libya. We didn't know what was on the other side. There was a complete blackout. No foreign correspondents had been there. I mean, it had been under Gaddafi. You know, we were there for the Arab Spring in Egypt, and all of a sudden, you know, they weren't letting anyone through. And then, because of all the upheaval in Egypt, you know, the border fell, and I literally walked from one side to the other, just absolutely not knowing what we were going to see on the other side. And what met us on the other side was a whole bunch of people in regular clothes, but with big guns. And you don't know who they are. You don't know, you know, how they're going to view you. And so I think that was the absolute scariest, you know, border crossing I've ever done. But I've crossed a lot of borders and had a lot of not terribly nice experiences,
Yeah.
because there are places where journalists, you know, generally are not viewed with a great deal of love around the world. You know, that is an
Or
experience
in
that
our own country.
specifically in our own country, and that is something that was like seen, on steroids under the Trump administration. But generally speaking, we're people who ask questions. We're there to get to the bottom of things. We're often in places where they don't want us, and we're actually the people that we're responsible to is the public, right? We're not responsible to our news organizations. We're not responsible to ourselves even. We are there to represent the public, right? The public's right to know. And as we know, a lot of people don't want us there. You know, a lot of people don't want us to ask those questions, to talk to people, to really hear their stories. And so, you know, I mean, I've been shot at, I've been, you know, pushed around, I've been sexually agredida, you know, I mean, all of it over the years, you know.
Yeah, it's like you have to build an armor in order to be a
Yeah.
Latina journalist.
Mm.
Okay, next question. If you could change one of your career choices or decisions, what would that be and why?
It's an interesting one. If I could change one of my career choices, I think, I don't know, like, Like, had you asked me that at a different time, I would have said, oh, I should have taken that job maybe, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I look back on my career and I think like I'm pretty happy with where it's ended up. I've had a lot of really great opportunities. I miss being overseas. I miss being an international correspondent. I wish I was more connected in this country. I tell you what I really think. I have found it really hard when I came back to the United States, and I was the first Latina to head an NPR broadcast. I found it so hard. That first year was so hard. I hadn't fully understood how ill prepared the public, and especially NPR's public, was to see someone like me in that role. And if you're saying someone like me, so imagine someone who was born in London, do you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
went to a fancy university, had a bunch of awards in her back pocket. So imagine if they're not ready to see someone like me, then how are they ready to see someone, who really should be there, really needs to be there? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Someone who hasn't had all those opportunities. And so I think that was a really, really hard and shocking thing. And so what it has made me realize is that there's still so much work to be done. There's just so much work to be done. There just is. I have been shocked at how invisible Latinos are in this country.
Yeah.
How, especially in media, we are not treated with respect. We are not given the advantages. We are not curried. We are not asked to speak on issues that we know about and understand. And I have to tell you, that has filled me with, an enormous number of regrets that I, was not more involved earlier on in what was happening in the country that I was reporting to.
Right. And as Latinos, how do we make ourselves more prominent? Like, how do we get to the forefront of these issues?
I don't know. I scream a lot on Twitter, pero eso no. It doesn't seem to have done much good, pero bueno, that's what I've been doing. I mean, so first of all, what I would say is to anyone in our community, especially young Latinas and Latinos, is that always know that whenever you're in the room, you belong there. They need you more than you need them. They do. And you might not feel that. They might make you think that that's not true, but I can tell you that it's true. They need you more than you need them.
Right.
They need your expertise. They need your views. They need your story ideas. They need that. And so when you sit at any table, always know that you matter enormously and you have something incredibly important to impart.
Right.
And so that's just the first thing. And the second thing is, you've got to remind people all the time that they don't know what they don't know, that they're missing something, and that's an uncomfortable place to be. It's an uncomfortable place to be. I found it's an uncomfortable place to be for me. I've pointed it out to famous broadcasters when they are talking about immigration or talking about something to do with the Latino community, and they have someone, and they don't have anyone representing the community there. But that's just the beginning, right? That's allowing us to actually speak about our community. But there's so much more. Why can't we be experts generally in anything else? Why aren't we there? And it's not that we don't have the expertise, and it's not that we don't have the talent, and it's not that we don't have all the things that are important. It's just that there's a massive blind spot, and you have to remind people of that it's a form of bias. It is. It's a form of bias, and you have to remind people of that. And so when I've done that, it's an uncomfortable place to be. People don't like it, and you get a lot of pushback. But things have been changing.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely.
Good. And it's important to be a champion, I think, for other up-and-coming Latinos and Latinas.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that to me, that's the most important thing. Like, if you are not doing that work, then if you're not using the position that you have to make sure that the next generation is there, and the generation after that, and to also step aside when you can, to make room,
Right.
That's the biggest gift ultimately, I think.
Yeah. Well, Lulu, thank you so much for your time again, and thank you all for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. Again, make sure to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at NAHJ Houston. You can also find a replay of this on our YouTube channel at NAHJ Houston. And Lulu, thank you again for your insight. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
And for anyone that is watching, I would just say the NAHJ, they have this fabulous new fellowship with Verizon Media. It's a 1-year fellowship. You have to be a member in good standing. Go check it out at nahj.org.
Thank you all.